This is the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Jason, and today I am joined by Todd Crapper from Broken Ruler Games. Hey Todd, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. So we are going to talk about High Plains Samurai. Maybe, Todd, just give us like a big picture in terms of like the setting and the themes of the game. What is High Plains Samurai all about?
The simplest way that I can put it is the ultimate mashup that's played on acid. It's a game that's set in a world that combines Western gunfighters with samurai warriors, Arctic barbarians, steampunk, 1920s gangsters, where characters have superpowers and they're basically fighting to save their world from divine influence and destruction.
Awesome. I've been listening to the comic strip AP that you guys did for High Plains Samurai, and the Western stuff comes through really strongly, right? At least in terms of like the game you guys are playing. And I thought that was really interesting because I don't think we actually get too many Western influenced role playing games. It's not something we see very often. I don't feel like. What do you think?
It's the one that people have really latched onto the most. In High Plains Samurai, there's 5 main cities, and each one has their own distinct feel because they've become separated over time, and they've basically walled themselves up from each other. So each of them has grown their own influence, and so there is Hunan, which is very, very, very Western influenced. And in fact, it's actually influenced by the Sharon Stone movie, The Quick and the Dead. The idea of there being... Yeah, we just watched it the other day, actually, and it was like, man, I had no idea just how much it influenced me. But yeah, a lot of people really latched on to the Western part, and I think especially, too, once you kind of take the idea of removing barriers like physics and being able to, occasionally just, whip out a katana or throw shuriken or any of this other kind of stuff, and knowing that, as long as you're working off that basic premise, a lot of people have really hooked themselves onto it, that I even had to remind my own group, there's like 4 other locations that we could go to. No, we're good. We when we play tested it, we almost focused exclusively in Hunan because it really appeals to a lot of people that, there are some Western RPGs that are out there, and it really seems to connect with people.
Yeah, the thing about I find I like a Western RPG, and I've played several of them, but a couple of them I've played that I've really enjoyed are pretty like not widely known games. I think most people know, what's that one that's kind of supernatural tinged?
Deadlands? Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of people know Deadlands, but I like and actually Deadlands does do a couple of interesting mechanical things with its theme, but I'm always really interested in like games that are able to take their mechanics and translate the theme through the mechanics a little bit, right? Does that make sense? And so that's what I'm always kind of looking for in games as a general matter. And the Westerns I've really loved, or the Western games I've loved, have done that. They've like acknowledged like what it means to be a Western, right? But that may be a little off topic. We'll get to mechanics in a minute. But as far as like the genre mashup goes, can you think of any like other touchstones in terms of like what it might be similar to for people, or is this a completely like original idea?
Well, like everything else, I'd like to believe it's a completely original idea. You never know; there might be something else out there. But yeah, this was actually heavily influenced by a movie I have yet to watch. So I'm sure that there will be some hate mail that comes in for this, but let's go with it anyways. The good, and the bad.
Not from our listeners.
The good, the bad, and the weird was the primary focal point that became High Plains Samurai. So it started off with my development team from Killshot. After that was all said and done, the game was published, and I was ready to move on with something else. I approached them. I said, okay, you guys have had to put up with me and what I wanted to play for the last 2 years. What do you guys want to do, on the condition that I want to try and see if we can do something with Killshot's mechanics? And right away, Fraser Ronald, who's part of the development team and is actually working with me on High Plains Samurai, right away came out and said the good, the bad, and the weird, and gave the basic premise of it, which is the good, the bad, and the ugly, but Korean cinema and, with some martial arts involved, and it's a train robbery. Boom, done. And we went with that, and it
Nice.
grew from there. And once I decided that this was something I wanted to approach and take on, I started to really start latching on to anything and everything and just trying to see what would stick. And then eventually I realized that I was, making a whole bunch of different stuff stick. And everything was working off the concept of these are all characters with their own sense of honor, whether or not it's personal or cultural, but these are all different types of characters who believe in the value of themselves and proving themselves out to a wider world that would rather just kind of spit them out and leave them in the dust. So, you know, like I said, I'd like to think that it's an original concept, but it's based on a lot of just what I thought was awesome and literally threw it up against the wall and was amazed how much of it was actually able to stick.
I mean, there's a huge value in taking genre tropes, right? And leaning on genre tropes in role-playing games, I think, because I always kind of feel like one of the difficulties in role-playing games, and I think some of the worst role-playing games, frankly, are the ones that are incredibly ornate in their settings and therefore make it difficult for people to easily like kind of get into the same shared headspace so that it makes role playing easier, right? And so I find this game super intriguing in that way because I think like to the extent that it does like grab onto these different genre tropes, I think that those can be anchors for play, right? I mean, those can definitely like anchor your play, and I find that interesting. And by mashing them up, I think it helps it take it to like a different level of just being like, you know, standard Western tropes or standard steampunk tropes, right?
Yeah, and one of the things about it too that I was very conscientious of, especially once I realized just, you know, all the different genres and tropes that I was trying to mash together was if you try and start telling people how to play with them, then you definitely start getting into trouble because everyone has their own interpretation. They have their own sense of what makes these things awesome. And what I didn't want to do, much like with a lot of my designs, I don't like telling people how to play. What I like doing is basically setting parameters of, okay, well, this is how we're at least going to agree to use the dice, and this is how turns are going to basically work so that we don't get into arguments. But when it comes time to how we describe what our characters do, why things are happening the way that they're happening, it's you really just let the players kind of do their own thing and roll with it. And when you start getting as zany as this game can get, and this game has gone zany at times. We've even had it where they've tried to rob the Salvation, which is basically picture it as basically an armored train in a Mad Max Road Warrior kind of setup, but it's actually intelligent and it can actually react and respond. So picture a fight with a train that chooses to go over a cliff, but halfway down the cliff it launches spikes that hook to either end of the cliff wall, so it's now suspended in midair while all the other, vehicles that were acting as its bodyguards are like falling over the cliff, and now you're dodging vehicles while not trying to fall off the train. And when you get to things like that, the last thing you want to do is tell people how to play and how things are supposed to work in your
Yeah, you
eyes.
bet. Yeah.
You just let them go with it. And that's one of the fun things about High Plains Samurai is, just kind of watching people just roll with it and start really adding on to just the absolute insanity. But it becomes controlled insanity because, there's plenty of room for everyone to be able to do their own thing with it. And it all works together in its own bizarre way.
Well, so before we jump into mechanics, what are the player characters doing? Like, is it like an adventure? Are they like a team of operatives? Is it a mission thing? Like what do you expect that, like, when we sit down at the table, like what are our characters going to be engaged in? What's the sort of like flow of the sort of like implied story or the ideal story?
So the game works on two levels. It works on a player level and it works on a character level. So the players, and by players I'm also including the GM, who in this case is known as the director, are actually taking a crack at writing the first draft of a story, whether or not it's going to be a screenplay, television series, novel, comic book, or anything like that. And so it's going to be messy. It's going to be sloppy. It's going to be something where theoretically it might not be something that you could ever sell to a publisher, but it's that first draft that really gives people that sense of excitement, anticipation, and that they're going someplace with it. That's what the players are doing. The characters are a bunch of scattered loners who are basically bad people who have decided to come together and do something good. They're very honorable people who are trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world that basically was almost destroyed by Chaos, the entity that both created the one land, the name of the setting, and then tried to destroy it, because Chaos, when it was creating the universe, decided that it needed a little more focus and direction that it wasn't able to create. So it created the five elemental spirits, its children basically, which are balance, honor, innocence, patience, and strife. And each one contributed something to the creation of the universe. And as their reward, they were allowed to each take a part of the universe and craft it in their own image. And they decided, the five of them together, to create the one land. And when Chaos saw how much love and attention they were giving the one land, it got jealous and decided to wipe it out as a lesson. And so now you have the one land that is basically no longer one land. It is actually heavily divided. And in the center point between all five cities are the wastes, which is basically a radioactive desert wasteland, which is actually the source of the chi powers, the superpowers that many characters are able to tap into. So everyone's very scattered, very divided, but there is a main storyline. There is a central threat that actually could wipe out everything that they know and love. And so they eventually decide to come together to be, the heroes that they always knew that they were.
That's awesome. Okay, well, so let's talk about mechanics. What's the main sort of like mechanical feature of the game? Like how does it work?
The way it works is that, like I said, players are taking a crack at telling the first draft of a story. And the way they do it is it's through a very shared storytelling experience. So you have players who are actually called writers in this game, because what they're doing is they're not necessarily reacting to the situation that's given to them. What they're doing is they're actually moving the story forward. They're not asking for permission. One of the main things in High Plains Samurai is don't ask, tell. Simply take what's already been introduced into the story and roll with it from the point of view of your character. So you'll have a lead character. It'll be the central figure you control, and you can take on as many additional supporting characters as you like. What then happens is another player will then provide the outcome to the description that you've provided into the story.
Okay.
So if a writer provides a description through their character, the director will then provide the outcome. If the director provides a description through one of her characters, then one of the writers will then provide the outcome. So it's always going back and forth. There is never one person who is ever able to take total control of the story, but making sure that everything that's been introduced remains within the purview of whoever created it. There is probably the one absolute rule in the game is called the rule of initiative, in that whoever introduces an element into the story has final approval on how it is applied. And so, for example, if your character pulls out a pocket watch and inside there's actually a picture of your character's family that you haven't seen in 15 years, if another writer comes along and introduces something else to your pocket watch that you don't feel is appropriate to your character, you have the right to ask for a rewrite, to basically say, no, that's not what I want this to be used for. And then that other player has to basically respect those wishes. One of the main ways that all of this is kind of handled and tracked is through details. So when you're providing a description, you have to choose a potential, which is basically the equivalent of a stat or ability score. Okay. Each potential has a set number of details that you can build into the description. Each of those details you can think of as being an action or some kind of element that really helps to move the character and or the story along. The more details you're able to build into your description, the higher the dice value is going to be should you trigger what's known as a complication roll.
Okay.
And dice rolls are really only made if you're trying to complicate something for another character. So there is no success or failure in the sense of like, I want to scale the side of the building. Okay, you scale the side of the building. I mean, we're talking about characters that are supposed to be superpowered, the definition of awesomeness. The last thing you want to do is to, like accidentally trip and fall into a puddle of water. So it's only when you're trying to complicate something for another character, such as through acts of violence or interrogation, basically trying to get somebody to do something that they didn't plan on. And when that happens, there are complications that can be brought in. But when they do, there's always a risk that if you're trying to place a complication on another character, there's an equal risk that you might actually receive a complication yourself. So, yeah, it's a lot of back and forth. There are ways that you can actually spend your stamina, which is basically your health, to try and cheat, to basically say, I rolled a 5, but I really needed a 6, so I'm going to spend some of my stamina to make that a 6. But the more you do that, the more you stretch yourself out, and then eventually you might actually be written out of the story.
That's pretty cool.
And yeah, it's a way that really kind of forces everybody at the table to work together integrating the story. It doesn't really allow, there will be little moments where someone has the spotlight shone on them, but very quickly it passes back and forth to everybody else. It gives everyone a chance to really, create equally into the story.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It sounds like the mechanics are basically set up to have like this velocity, like the story has this forward momentum, right? And the story is that momentum continues and is occasionally like interrupted or complicated, like and that's where the dice go. I think that's really super interesting. It reminds me a little bit of one of my favorite games, which is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but Graham Walmsley's Cthulhu Dark. In Cthulhu Dark, your characters literally can't fail. Like it's an investigation game. It's not an action game like High Plains Samurai, but the characters can't fail. They are constantly moving forward, right? And the only time like that there's any sort of like quote unquote conflict roll or any kind of like die roll where we need the dice to arbitrate like an outcome is if another player says, well, I think it would be interesting if that wasn't as easy for you, or if you don't succeed, right? And then they get to kind of roll against that player, right? And so in that sense, I like the idea of like, okay, you've created this collaborative space, and we're not just responsible for like our characters' actions and motivations, but we are engaging in a collaborative storytelling effort, right? And we should be just as interested in like the beats of the story that make it interesting, that make it an interesting story, not just like, oh, we want to just succeed constantly, or oh, I'm only concerned about what my character is doing. I like that a lot. One thing I was going to ask that kind of pinged my brain earlier when you were talking, calling the GM character the director, or calling the players like what was it, writers. That is really interesting because in the AP that you guys are doing, it feels very cinematic in the way that you guys like describe things. Like I think in the very first episode, you basically like kind of described like it almost sounded like a camera framing, like shot or something, like you were framing a camera shot. Like it had that kind of very cinematic feel, which is something I really love. And so I'm wondering, is there any other textual support so far in the book in terms of like getting people to think to be in that headspace, to think as like the authors and director of a film or a TV show? Like you've got it there like clearly in the mechanics a little bit, but I'm just wondering if that's something like, is that an emphasis in the text? Like is it very explicit, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yes, there is a part that's right at the very beginning when everyone sits down to basically, during the character creation phase where you choose the formats that you're going to be working in. So if you really want to start to nail down the genre, High Plains Samurai is very action heavy, but at the same time too, it could be action investigation. It could be a very noir based action.
Okay.
So you can work on your genre, but then you can also determine the medium. What is it that you're trying to emulate? So when Nick and I were playing on the AP, we right away we went into cinematic because I'm a film school dropout, so I'm obviously always trying to kind of rekindle that romance that I had with filmmaking, and this has really been an effective way for me to do this. I'm a very visual person, and this game has really kind of helped me stretch those muscles and kind of rekindle that romance a little bit. And so, but it's not a given way. So for example, if you decide that you wanted to do it as a piece of written fiction, you wanted to do it as a series of novels.
I see.
What you could do is what that allows you to do things such as inner monologue. So it really kind of gives a little room. And then, once you see one person start to do it, this is something I've always noticed as the director. If I were to give cinematic cues and camera angles, and I'd say, and then we star wipe over to this next shot,
right? Yeah.
Then other players, they start picking up on that as well, and they start to incorporate that into it. And it once again leans on the whole, well, now that I've introduced this possibility into the story, others are free to take it and roll with it. There's other things that are determined right from the very beginning too, such as the level of technology, because when you have things such as steampunk and you're really taking reality and bending it like a pretzel, you do want to set some baselines on how far do things go. Is there technology that allows us to fly, or are we literally going off of is everything covered in like, dust and barely works? There's also matters like rating, how hardcore do you want to get into it? And for that, the game does work off a very simplified movie rating system because it's something that everybody understands
Yeah.
regardless of their country. So
Hmm.
even if you say you want to go with a hard R, well, what does that mean? Is it rated R simply for violence, or is it rated R for, sexual encounters as well and everything else like this? Or do you want to do it as an animated series so we keep everything PG, where we're shooting at people, but we're not shooting them? We're shooting around. We're going G.I. Joe with our violence, so to speak. Lots of
Yeah.
guns,
Yeah.
but nobody's ever going to get hurt. So yeah, it is one of the things that's built into the game because if you don't have those foundations from the very beginning, the story can easily really trail off the road.
I find that super appealing. It's really, I didn't know that about the game until our conversation right now, but I find that super appealing because in my own play, I like to use the metaphor of specifically film to basically convey things and describe things to the players. And I find that they give that back to me as well, to the point where a lot of my players now, like, they straight up say, we see the camera move over here, right? And they describe what they see, right? I just think it's super helpful. I think it's a really, really helpful way of getting people to not only think about their own characters' motivations, but also to think about like the greater story and the sort of like, the motifs, the aesthetic, the visuals, all that stuff that like makes a really good, like, setting and story. And so I find that, I think it's a really smart insight is what I'm getting at. I think a lot of game designers don't think about that aspect of role-playing games, right? And so I think it's really clever.
It's one of those things where there were a lot of mechanics incorporated into the beginning that really tried to control those things to ensure that players were always incorporating those shared narrative elements into the story. It didn't take long for me to learn that you didn't really have to. It is one of those things, there's quite a few games that are coming out where they incorporate story beats into the mechanics themselves. And it goes back to that whole, I don't like forcing people to play a certain way. I like to give them something where here's a foundation that we're all going to agree on. Basically, schoolyard rules. Okay, so we all agree that if the ball goes over the fence, then it's out of bounds, right? Okay, but anything else beyond that, it's up to us. How you play with one group of friends is not the same how you play with another group of friends, but there's enough of a foundation in there that if you take two different people from two different groups playing High Plains Samurai, they can still come together, and each one of them has their own way of approaching it within this set of solid mechanics. So it's one of those things where the more I started running this game for other people and watching how they went with it, you just start to learn that everyone just has their own innate storytelling abilities. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that is they're going to be up on stage accepting an Academy Award in a couple of years.
Right.
But
Yep.
it works for them because the only audience you have to make happy is the table that you're playing at. And when you sit around or if you listen to podcasts where writers, on certain shows or different projects, and when they're actually talking, they're just amusing themselves. And as long as they're happy with it, then they're willing to put it out there and they'll sell it. And it really comes through in the work. So as long as, I'm giving people something that really lets them go nuts and creates a story that they want to tell, that's what it's all about. And that's one of the other things with High Plains Samurai is that even though it has a setting, it's not a detailed setting. It's a very bullet point, very loose setup of here are the main locations, here are the various major characters, and here is the main plot that we are going to help you set up. And then afterwards, it's a series of scenarios to say, if this character ended up doing this, here's something that can happen, but it's at your leisure. It's however you want to approach the story, however you want to tell it. It becomes your own version of High Plains Samurai. I like looking at it as we're creating a bunch of alternate realities and we're looking to see, which reality actually saves the one land or which reality was the one land destroyed in. And once that started coming about, it actually really gave the book itself a voice that's going to become stronger, based on the Kickstarter. What the Kickstarter is doing is, aside from paying for additional editing and artwork and other things to really take it and expand on it, it's giving me a baseline of, okay, how much does everybody want me to put into this for you to play with? And once I know that, then I know how much information to give and to almost kind of act as like little cue cards, more so than a concrete rule book or a setting guide of no, in Hunan there are exactly this many streets. And if you were looking
Right,
for
yeah.
someone to, if you're looking for a blacksmith, there's this guy and he's located right over here.
He's right.
It's not like
he's this number of hex squares away.
exactly. Even then too, the way that characters are created from the director's point of view, like I play High Plains Samurai with no prep whatsoever, and that's just not as the person who created the game. I don't have to do anything with it because it takes me maybe 30 seconds to create a character. So, for example, in comic strip AP, the character of Rhino literally, came up out of the fly right then and there at the moment. I thought, who would be someone that would be really good to take on Lou? And I just had this idea of this big, surly British guy who basically charged like a rhino. 30 seconds later, I had a fully
Nice.
statted out character that kicked Lou's ass right up until the very end where he was barely able to make it. So it's a game that you can literally just create on the fly as you go. And it's one of those things I've really discovered that I think this is the game that I've always wanted to run for the longest time. I just didn't realize that this was what I wanted until I did it.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about the Kickstarter then. When does the campaign start?
May 30th.
So just so listeners know, we're about 2 weeks out from that when we're recording this, but maybe we can talk about maybe what you know now as far as like how the Kickstarter is going to go. Todd, so what sorts of pledge levels are going to be available? I mean, are these going to be physical books? Is this going to be PDF only, hardcover? What do you think?
So there's going to be the PDF. There's going to be a soft cover option as well, and those will be the ones that the Kickstarter is going to be funding. And what I'm starting with right now is $3,000 Canadian, so $50 American.
That's nothing American, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All it takes is one really.
You'll make that in like 2 hours, yeah.
Done. So yeah, I'm aiming for 3,000 Canadian, and what that one's going to do is that's going to basically create a slightly bigger version of High Plains Samurai than what exists right now for the Kickstarter edition. I also, over the last couple of months, I've been running a public playtest of High Plains Samurai, and that book came in at about 84 pages, which contains everything you need to know, very basic setup. So for $3,000, I will expand on that into a 96-page PDF and softcover book. And one of the other things that I'm also looking to do, really my true goal with this, is that at $7,000, it will be expanded into a 160-page book called High Plains Samurai, Black Scorpion's Revenge. And what that will do is that will add on a director's chapter on best practices for running High Plains Samurai. And also, too, it's going to feature the main story of Black Scorpion's Revenge. Black Scorpion is basically an infamous bandit leader who is possibly the only person in all of the One Land to piss off every single warlord all at once, that they actually banded together to try and kill her. They didn't kill her the first time, and she went into hiding. And I'm not going to get into any details because there's going to be a serialized anthology of fiction written by Fraser Ronald, who I've mentioned before. He's actually written the first 4 chapters of Black Scorpion's origin, and that's going to be released over the course of the Kickstarter. We're also looking at expanding that outward. So at $5,000, Fraser will actually finish that story and reveal the true, maybe even then not even true, but one possible origin story for Black Scorpion. So then at $7,000, it will get into the story of how Black Scorpion basically shows up one day and starts killing every warlord that there is in the 5 cities and basically trying to bring everything crashing and burning to pick up where Chaos left off. So $7,000 is going to create basically High Plains Samurai with a series of scenarios to help run this main feature.
Cool.
I'm also taking a look at maybe expanding that outwards into a series of ones. Someone made the recommendation to say, like, you could just kind of treat this the way they do the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, where it's like maybe it was only intended to be one, but you can just continue on the story. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking at right now. But I'm a very paranoid, cautious, superstitious person. So I'm sitting at $3,000 for the main goal, and then I'm keeping my fingers crossed for 7,000 to do what I call the true version of High Plains Samurai that I want to publish. I just don't want to have to go through a Kickstarter like this over again, because this has been 4 years in the making. I really don't want it to go to 6 until I finally get something funded.
Right. Yeah. Well, awesome. I had one other question. Oh, yeah. As far as like materials that are available right now, if like listeners are listening to this and they want to check out what's available for High Plains Samurai, or even like playtest it or try it out, like, do you have stuff available for them that they can go find?
Yeah, well, as it stands right now, the public playtest, which was free, is done and it's closed. And the PDF is being pulled off the shelves right now virtually.
Okay.
But the Kickstarter itself, there will be a preview of the first chapter to give everyone an idea. But also, too, it has full layout and everything to it. So you will literally see what the game will look like when it's done. When you back the Kickstarter, you'll also receive a copy of High Plains Samurai, the Kickstarter edition, that will have the up-to-date complete version. Basically, what I have written is what you will receive right away.
That's what I was kind of getting at. Yeah, was there going to be a quick start or something like that, right?
Yeah, no, it's not a quick start by any. It's literally you could take it and start playing right away with it, which is exactly what I want, to get more people out there trying it, because you never know what other avenues I might discover. So, and you can do that even just by backing it at the $1 level, because I'm going off the premise that, you'll see what you like and you'll either, literally send me spit in an envelope that I can throw in my own face, or you'll take that and you'll move it up to like the $50 level, where you can actually get a limited edition Kickstarter only hardcover version of the final product.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, I don't think I have any other questions about High Plains Samurai, but listeners, we will have a link to the Kickstarter page whenever this episode goes up, because I think this is going up maybe a day or two into the campaign, or maybe right before. So we'll have the links ready for you then. Let's go ahead and go to our sponsor spot.
This episode of the Gauntlet Podcast is brought to you by our plausibly deniable friends at Nocturnal Media.
This time we're talking about Cold Shadows, narrative espionage role-playing. Cold Shadows had a successful Kickstarter a few months ago, but they've got the backer kit open now, and if anyone's interested in doing pre-orders, they can do that. Cold Shadows is less James Bond and spycraft, and it's much more the John le Carré novels. That's the tagline that grabbed me. I grew up on those. My dad taught international relations, and they had all these novels around with some of the first big adult books I read. Tinker Tailor, Soldier Spy. It really wants to emulate spy stories that are about trust and betrayal and deception and the job of being a spy. So we're getting Graham Greene, some of the Ludlum questions about crosswork and betrayal and so on. And if you've ever seen the really excellent British TV show Sandbaggers, that is amazing look into that life. I've read some stuff about MI6 during this whole period, and it's just fascinating world. Now this is focused kind of on Cold War feel, but it can be also used for modern games. It's got some elements to just bring that question of how do we track trust? How do we track cover our assets and so on? They did well enough in the Kickstarter that they have an expansion called Cities in Shadow, which is a cities book for it. It's all based on John Wick's Blood and Honor, which is a samurai role-playing game about the trials and tribulations of being under an authority yet having to do these dangerous things. You can find all of this at coldshadows.backerkit.com, and you'll find a button there for pre-orders. You can get the softcover of the main book. You can get the softcover of the Cities in Shadow expansion. They've got dice and token sets there and special story pack cards. And that's going to be open until the end of May. It's a really neat game, and I'm very excited. I backed it in the Kickstarter, and I can't wait to see the final product.
Thanks again to our co-conspirators at Nocturnal Media for supporting the Gauntlet Podcast.
It's Giving Me Life. Okay, Todd, this is the segment where we talk about something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy, not necessarily related to role-playing games, though it can be. Todd, what's giving you life?
I was thinking of defaulting to the whole parent thing and going my son.
Every guest goes with their kids.
I know, and I thought it's way too easy and everything else like this, But the thing that's actually given me life, it's something that I read last night. On Google Plus, there's Jason D'Angelo has a collection called The Daily Apocalypse, and he is literally writing about Apocalypse World 2. Very much from the point of view of almost like this prophet spreading the gospel that is,
I think I saw that. Yeah, I think I remember seeing this post somewhere. Yeah.
I haven't read Apocalypse World yet. I'm only just starting to get to PBTA games right now, and so it's been kind of interesting to read that and really get an idea of what all the fuss is about. But one of the things that he had posted last night was kind of a transcript of sort from a seminar that Vincent Baker gave, where he talked about, how understanding your audience and how he used that to actually create the mechanics behind Apocalypse World. And it's mind-boggling the more I've been thinking about it, because what he did basically, Vincent Baker, not Jason D'Angelo, just to clarify, was basically say, okay, there's 3 different types of people. There's someone who's going to open your book, who's going to read through the rules, and then is going to say, well, what the fuck is this? And then throw it across the room and hate it instantaneously. Then there will be the other group of people that will look at it and say, like, this is brilliant, this is genius, this has been what I've been waiting for, and they go out and they praise it. And then you've got the third group who looks at it and says, yeah, it's good, but these people who are really going on about it, there must be something and I'm not quite getting it. So they poke and they prod. And that leaves the people who are praising the game to step right in and say, like, well, of course it's awesome, and look at all these different ways and look what you can do with it. But then you'll also have the counterpoint of the people who hate it and say, like, are you nuts? This thing is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, and this is why it sucks. And you start to create this discourse on your game that just starts to spread it out like a virus. And then you have something like Apocalypse World that has done exactly that. And when I read this, I can't help but think of Vincent Baker just sitting there in a chair made of bones, laughing maniacally at what he is.
I made this text totally obtuse so that you would disagree with it and talk about it, right?
Exactly. And it's almost, I couldn't help but think that maybe the true purpose of the game was how we interpret the game. And it just started. My mind has just been spiraling.
That's crazy. Yeah, I actually hadn't heard that, but it's super interesting and makes a lot of sense, because I think 1E Apocalypse World is incredibly opaque. I think it's a very hard read, actually. The people don't agree with me on that, but I didn't really get PBTA until I started playing Dungeon World, and I didn't even really get Dungeon World until I read the Beginner's Guide to Dungeon World. And so but once I got the hang of it, Vincent's text suddenly made a lot more sense. But initially, it was a bit of an opaque exercise. It's like, okay, this is not the most user-friendly manual. So it's kind of interesting, this idea that maybe that was that he landed on that as a tactic almost, of like, this is how you get people to engage with your game, and create a conversation and create a sort of like, from a design standpoint, like, or from a game theory or a theory of game design standpoint, like discussion and buzz, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, because even the whole point of like, this game is played out like a conversation. The first time I saw that in Dungeon World, I thought, have you seen conversations we have at our tables? That's not a civil conversation by any means whatsoever.
Right,
what are you talking about? But yeah, it's been one of those things that as time's gone on, that it's been a system that people have really dissected in a way that I've never really seen before, even during the big D20 boom.
I know something about that, as it turns out.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I fell victim to that as well. But yeah, it's just been fascinating, and just the more I've been thinking about that, the more it's just been making me giggle with glee.
Awesome. Well, listeners, that's our show. If you want to get in touch with the Gauntlet, we are on G+, our G+ community. Just go to the community section and search for the Gauntlet. You'll find us there. We also have a website, which is gauntlet-rpg.com. Todd, where can we find you?
My name is Todd Crapper. You just have to do a search and I'm going to pop up. It's not exactly a name that people are claiming left, right, and center.
There are 2 of you on G+, as it turns out, because I had to figure out which was the right. I had to figure out which was the right Todd Crapper to invite to this call. So yeah, there's another one.
Oh, I am calling someone out on a duel now. Okay. So yeah, more specifically, you can actually find me on Google Plus as Todd Crapper. I'm the one with the nickname of the Warden because that's the name that I used to go
that's how I
by
eventually found you.
Yeah, that's the name I used to go by when I was ashamed of my name. Now I embrace it. You can also find me on Twitter under the handle Warden Up, and I am on Facebook as well. And I've been starting to kind of diversify my Facebook friends to be people who, just simply want to follow me rather than someone who I've actually met physically in person, which used to be the condition for it. And then on top of that, too, there's also, I have the Broken Ruler Games website, which is at brokenrulergames.net. And then I have my own personal blog that I do occasionally fill from time to time, which is onthecrapper.wordpress.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And best of luck on the Kickstarter.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to need it.
And thanks, listeners. Take care.